What happens when the people negotiating your future stop trusting each other? Not the owners, not the fans, not even the media, but the players, the agents, and the very union that's supposed to protect them. Because right now, something is quietly breaking inside the WNBA, and almost nobody is talking about how serious it really is. On the surface, it looks like normal collective bargaining drama. Negotiations, deadlines, strong words, public statements. That happens in every league. But this isn't normal. Agents are now openly pushing back against the WNBPA. Players are reportedly divided behind closed doors. Strike authorization is still on the table. And trust might already be gone. Behind the headlines, a different story is unfolding. One that involves power, money, control, and a league that's growing faster than ever because of one undeniable shift in momentum. Because while this battle is being framed as union versus owners, there's another conflict happening inside the house. Agents versus leadership. Mid-tier players versus max contract veterans. Future stars versus the old guard. And the timing couldn't be more explosive. The league is hotter than it has ever been. Ratings are climbing. Sponsorship money is surging. Expansion talk is everywhere. Media companies are circling. The spotlight is brighter than ever. And yet, instead of unity, we're watching fractures form in real time. So how did we get here? How did agents, who usually stay in the background, end up sending a formal letter demanding transparency from the very union meant to represent their clients? And why are players suddenly questioning the people they empowered to negotiate on their behalf? Because once you look past the headlines, this isn't just about a CBA. This might be about who actually controls the future of the WNBA. And the moment that changed everything? It started with a letter. But that wasn't even the real shock. It didn't start with a press conference. It didn't start with a leaked audio clip. It didn't even start with a public argument. It started with something far more controlled and far more dangerous. A letter. A formal, coordinated message sent by a group of prominent WNBA agents directly to the executive director of the WNBPA. And if you read between the lines, it wasn't just a request. It was a warning. Because when agents, who represent dozens of players across the league, collectively demand transparency from the union, that means something is already wrong. This wasn't one frustrated representative blowing off steam. This was nearly a dozen agents aligning together. Alignment like that doesn't happen by accident. The letter reportedly asked for greater transparency and coordinated communication, moving forward in collective bargaining negotiations. Now on paper, that sounds polite, professional, routine. But the subtext, we don't trust what we're being told. That's what made this different. Agents weren't just asking to be informed. They were asking to review the league's proposal directly. Undersigned non-disclosure agreements, if necessary. They wanted access to the full offer. They wanted clarity on what was actually being presented. And that request alone tells you everything. Because if the relationship between agents and union leadership was healthy, that wouldn't be necessary. The union typically serves as the bridge between players and ownership. Agents advise their clients. The union negotiates. There's communication, yes, but the structure remains intact. What's happening now breaks that structure. Agents are essentially saying, we don't want secondhand interpretations anymore. We don't want filtered summaries. We want to see the numbers ourselves. That is not a small development. And here's why it matters. Roughly 80% of the league is approaching free agency. That means contracts are about to be signed. Deals are about to be negotiated. Careers are about to be reshaped. For agents, this is the most critical window of the cycle. No season. No contracts. No commissions. No commissions. No income. A strike or lockout at this moment wouldn't just hurt the players. It would freeze the entire economic engine. Agents know that. Owners know that. And many players know that. Which is why this letter wasn't just about transparency. It was about urgency. The negotiations have reportedly stretched over 16 months. Deadlines are approaching. The league has indicated scheduling could be impacted if no agreement is reached by early March. That kind of timeline pressure changes everything. Because once scheduling is affected, the damage isn't theoretical anymore. It's real. Broadcast partners get nervous. Sponsors pause commitments. Momentum slows. And in a league that is finally experiencing explosive growth, momentum is everything. So when agents ask to be included directly in communication, They're not just protecting their paychecks. They're protecting the timing. And timing, right now, is priceless. But here's where it gets even more revealing. The agents didn't just ask for access to the proposal. They also reportedly requested transparency regarding player surveys being sent out by the union. They wanted input into the wording. They wanted clarity on the framing. That means they're concerned about how information is being presented to players. That means they're worried about influence. Because in labor negotiations, wording matters. One question can sway perception. One framing choice can shape consensus. If agents feel surveys could be structured in a way that nudges players toward a strike, that tells you trust isn't just shaky. It's fractured. And alignment among agents at this level is extremely rare. These are competitors. They fight for clients. They negotiate against each other constantly. For them to unify publicly like this, that signals a shared concern bigger than individual contracts. They're thinking long-term, about the league's health, about sustainability, about what happens if this momentum collapses under internal conflict. And behind all of this, there are whispers of heated player calls, tough internal conversations, divisions within the leadership structure itself. Because when agents feel the need to step in like this, it usually means their clients are telling them something is off. But that wasn't even the most explosive part. Because once you understand why the agents are pushing so hard, you realize this isn't just about communication. It's about money, and who benefits most from the deal being negotiated. And that's where things start getting uncomfortable. Because not every player stands to gain equally. And not every player believes their interests are being protected the same way. And once that realization spreads through a locker room, you don't just have negotiations. You have instability. And instability during the biggest growth moment in league history? That's not just risky. That's potentially historic. But to understand why the agents are really alarmed, you have to look at the money nobody wants to talk about. And once you see those numbers, the tension makes a lot more sense. Here's the part most headlines are dancing around. This isn't just about transparency. It's about who gets paid and who gets squeezed out. Because when you strip away the press releases, the statements, the formal language, every collective bargaining negotiation eventually comes down to one thing: distribution. Who gets what? How much? And for how long? Right now, nearly 80% of the league is staring at free agency. That number alone changes everything. Free agency isn't just a routine cycle this time. It's happening during the most financially explosive period in league history. Television ratings have surged. Arena attendance has jumped. Merchandise is moving at historic levels. Corporate partnerships are multiplying. Expansion conversations are louder than ever. The pie is getting bigger. But here's the uncomfortable truth. A bigger pie doesn't automatically mean everyone gets a bigger slice. And that's where the tension lives. Because if a new CBA dramatically raises maximum contracts, where does that money come from? Revenue sharing is finite. Salary caps have structure. If top-tier contracts expand aggressively, something has to adjust somewhere else. And mid-level players know it. They've seen this before. During the last CBA cycle, many veterans who weren't max-level stars found themselves pushed out of the league. Roster spots tightened. Salaries didn't stretch as far as people expected. The middle class shrank. Now imagine that scenario during a boom cycle. If the league is suddenly worth more, if the media rights deals are larger, if sponsorship revenue climbs, then players expect raises across the board. But negotiations don't always distribute growth evenly. And that's where fear begins to spread quietly. Because max players are protected. Rookies under scale deals are locked into structured numbers. But the middle? They're vulnerable. Rotation players, bench contributors, solid veterans who aren't all-stars. They are the ones who can get caught in the math. If cap flexibility tightens, if owners push back hard, if leadership prioritizes certain financial structures, they're the first to feel it. And agents know exactly which clients fall into that category. Which is why this moment is so volatile. Because agents don't represent just the superstars. They represent the middle class of the league. They represent the players who can't afford a lost season. They represent the athletes whose entire career window might only be 5 or 6 prime years. For them, a strike isn't a power move. It's a gamble. And that's what makes this situation so delicate. If a strike happens at the peak of league momentum, it doesn't just pause games. It risks cooling down the fastest growth surge the WNBA has ever experienced. Sponsors may hesitate. Casual fans may drift. Broadcast partners may reconsider future valuations. Momentum in sports is fragile. It takes years to build. It can evaporate in months. Agents are watching that risk calculation carefully. Because unlike union leadership, agents operate purely on market timing. They don't get paid during negotiations. They don't get paid during a lockout. They don't get paid during a strike. They get paid when contracts are signed. And right now, contracts are waiting to be signed. That's not selfish. That's structural reality. And it creates a conflict of urgency. Union leadership may be willing to leverage a strike threat for stronger long-term gains. Agents may see that same strategy as dangerous in this specific moment. Because this isn't a rebuilding year. This isn't a stagnant period. This is a growth spike. And growth spikes are rare. The other layer nobody wants to say out loud? There is a generational shift happening inside the league. New stars are bringing new audiences, new television eyeballs, new sponsorship leverage. Younger players are entering during a time when endorsement deals can sometimes rival salaries. That changes how leverage is calculated. Veteran leaders who built the foundation of the league may view this moment as overdue compensation for years of underpayment. Younger players may view this moment as opportunity, not confrontation. And those perspectives aren't identical. So when agents request to review proposals directly, it's not just about transparency. It's about protecting their clients from being collateral damage in a power play. Because if negotiations stall too long, if rhetoric escalates, if deadlines get missed, the economic ripple effect doesn't hit evenly. It hits the most replaceable players first. That's the harsh truth of professional sports economics. Stars survive turbulence. Role players feel it immediately. And when agents begin coordinating together, which almost never happens at this scale, it signals a shared fear that something inside the negotiation strategy isn't aligning with market timing. They're not saying leadership is incompetent. They're not saying the union shouldn't fight. But they are signaling something subtle. Now may not be the moment to burn leverage. Not when the league is expanding. Not when new broadcast deals are forming. Not when the public narrative is finally turning overwhelmingly positive. Because public goodwill is currency. And once that currency disappears, it's hard to get back. This is where the situation becomes more complicated than a simple union versus owners battle. This is about timing strategy. Strike leverage works best when growth is stable and replaceable. It's far riskier during explosive momentum. And agents understand that better than anyone. They negotiate markets for a living. They know when to push. They know when to close. And right now, many of them appear to be signaling. Close the deal. Secure the growth. Don't gamble the surge. But here's where it becomes even more uncomfortable. Because if agents feel this strongly, it means players are talking to them behind the scenes. It means conversations are happening privately. It means some players may not be fully aligned with leadership strategy. And that leads to a dangerous place for any union. Division. Not public division. Not yet. But internal hesitation. And internal hesitation during labor negotiations weakens bargaining power instantly. Because once ownership senses fractures, they wait. They let pressure build. They let deadlines tighten. And they see who blinks first. So now the real question becomes, is this just healthy disagreement? Or is it the beginning of a deeper trust collapse inside the WNBPA? Because money alone doesn't cause fractures this visible. There has to be something more. And according to multiple reports, there was, behind closed doors, on a call that didn't go as smoothly as anyone expected. And what happened during that call may have changed the tone of everything. But that's where the story gets even more intense. The real turning point didn't happen in public. It didn't happen in a press release. It didn't happen in a headline. It happened on a call. A player call that was described as spirited, passionate, and at times, tough. Now those words sound diplomatic. But anyone who has been in a high-stakes negotiation room knows what that really means. Voices were raised. Frustrations surfaced. And unity, at least temporarily, cracked. Because when leadership has to reaffirm strike authorization, that means not everyone is comfortable anymore. Back in December, the player body authorized the executive committee to call a strike if necessary. That authorization is powerful. It signals solidarity. It shows strength. It tells ownership, we are aligned. But alignment is fragile. And according to reports, during that recent heated call, more than half of the leadership reaffirmed the desire to keep a strike on the table. Read that carefully. More than half reaffirmed it, which means not everyone did. In union politics, even small hesitation carries weight. Because when players start asking questions like, are we pushing too far? Is this the right timing? Who benefits most from this strategy? That's when trust becomes the central issue. And here's what makes this moment particularly sensitive. The WNBPA Leadership Committee is made up of some of the league's most respected veterans. Players who have fought for better pay. Players who have built this league brick by brick. Players who carried the WNBA through years of lower ratings and limited national attention. They earned their positions. But respect alone doesn't prevent disagreement, especially when the financial landscape shifts rapidly. Some mid-tier players have reportedly voiced concerns that previous CBA structures disproportionately benefited max-level veterans, that the middle class of the league didn't expand the way many hoped, that roster flexibility tightened, that certain protections didn't extend evenly. Now, whether that perception is fully accurate or partially emotional doesn't matter. What matters is that the perception exists, and perception drives internal confidence. Because if players start believing leadership is negotiating with a bias towards certain salary tiers, trust erodes quietly, not in dramatic outbursts, but in subtle doubt. It starts with, are we sure this is best for everyone? Then becomes, who exactly is this protecting? And eventually, are we being fully informed? That last question is the one that changes everything. Because once players question transparency, agents step in, which is exactly what we're seeing. And here's the part that makes this even more combustible. This isn't happening during a stagnant era. This is happening during the most transformative growth period in league history. That magnifies every disagreement. Because when growth accelerates, so do expectations. Veterans want long overdue compensation. Mid-tier players want stability. Younger players want opportunity. Agents want movement. Owners want predictability. Everyone wants something slightly different. And leadership is trying to balance all of it at once. That's an impossible task without complete trust. Reports indicate that after the heated call, union leadership sent follow-up correspondence describing the discussion as passionate but productive. That's standard language. But the need to send that message at all tells you tension was visible. If unity was airtight, reassurance wouldn't be necessary. And here's the deeper issue. Strike leverage only works if ownership believes players will hold the line. If ownership senses hesitation, they don't panic. They wait. They let pressure build. They allow internal debate to intensify. And suddenly, the negotiating power shifts. That's why internal fracture is more dangerous than public criticism. Because public criticism can be controlled. Internal doubt spreads. Now add another layer. Some players remember the last major CBA cycle vividly. They remember who benefited most. They remember roster turnover. They remember teammates who didn't survive the salary structure shift. Memory influences current trust. Even if leadership's intentions are aligned with fairness, past outcomes shape present skepticism. And skepticism during negotiations creates instability. This is where things get uncomfortable. Because unions rely on collective confidence. If players begin relying more heavily on their agents than on their union for clarity, that signals a hierarchy shift. Agents are not supposed to be the primary information source in CBA negotiations. The union is. When that dynamic changes, even slightly, it changes power. And power perception inside labor negotiations is everything. Now here's the subtle tension nobody is openly stating. There is a generational divide forming. Not hostile, not dramatic, but real. Veteran leaders view this negotiation as a culmination of years of sacrifice. Younger players entered the league during its surge. Their baseline expectations are different. Their leverage calculus is different. Their risk tolerance may be different. If you entered during lean years, you may be more willing to endure confrontation. If you entered during explosive growth, you may prioritize momentum. Neither side is wrong. But those perspectives can clash. And when they clash during a negotiation with deadlines approaching, every decision feels heavier. That's why the agent's letter landed so loudly. Because it wasn't just external noise. It reflected internal hesitation. Agents don't act unless their clients express concern, which means conversations inside locker rooms are happening. Quietly, privately, cautiously. And once private doubt becomes organized action, the dynamic shifts permanently. But this is where the story takes an even sharper turn, because all of this tension is unfolding during the rise of a new economic force inside the league. A player whose arrival has altered ratings, sponsorships, media deals, and public visibility in ways no one predicted this quickly. And whether anyone says it publicly or not, her presence changes the negotiation math. Because when one player shifts the entire revenue trajectory, every contract structure discussion feels different. And that's where the real pressure begins. Because this isn't just about trust. It's about timing. It's about momentum. And it's about what happens when a league finally hits its breakout moment, right in the middle of internal power negotiations. And once you factor that in, the tension we're seeing suddenly makes a lot more sense. But to understand that piece, we have to talk about the effect that changed everything. And that's where this story becomes bigger than union politics. Here's the reality nobody inside negotiations can ignore. The league feels different now. The arenas feel different. The ratings look different. The sponsorship conversations are different. And the money projections? Completely different. One player didn't build the WNBA, but one player undeniably accelerated its trajectory. Caitlin Clark didn't just enter the league as a rookie. She entered as a ratings engine. Her games didn't just trend. They dominated national sports conversations. Ticket demand didn't just increase. It exploded. Merchandise didn't just move. It vanished from shelves. Corporate interest didn't just grow. It recalibrated. And when that happens, when one arrival dramatically shifts the financial outlook of a league, the power dynamics change. Quietly, subtly, but undeniably. Because negotiations aren't conducted in emotional isolation. They're influenced by revenue projections, growth curves, public attention, future media rights valuations. Before this surge, bargaining strategy looked different. The league was stable but modest. Progress was incremental. Leverage came from solidarity and principle. Now, leverage comes from market momentum, and that momentum is fragile. Here's what makes this moment uniquely complicated. Veteran leadership has every reason to fight for larger guarantees. They carried the league when ratings were modest. They endured seasons without national hype. They built the infrastructure that allowed this surge to happen. From their perspective, this growth validates years of sacrifice. It justifies pushing harder than ever. But from another angle, this surge represents opportunity that shouldn't be disrupted. Because explosive growth windows don't stay open forever. Sports history is filled with leagues that peaked, stumbled, and never quite regained the same buzz. Momentum in sports is psychological as much as financial. And right now, the WNBA has captured something rare: mainstream curiosity. That curiosity is feeding partnerships. It's feeding expansion talks. It's feeding network negotiations. And every executive watching this situation knows one thing: disruption during growth is risky. This is where Caitlin Clark's presence changes the temperature of negotiations, even if she isn't saying a word publicly. Because when television executives evaluate future contracts, they're not just looking at tradition. They're looking at trends. And her impact created a measurable spike. More viewers, more cross-platform engagement, more casual fans tuning in. And casual fans are the most fragile audience in sports. Hardcore fans stay. Casual fans drift if the narrative cools. So now imagine this scenario. Strike authorization lingers. Negotiations stall. Public headlines shift from growth era to league turmoil. Sponsors hesitate. Media debates turn negative. The growth spike softens. That's not a guaranteed outcome, but it's a risk. And risk tolerance varies depending on where you sit in the salary structure. Max-level stars may feel insulated. Mid-tier players may feel exposed. Agents see the entire board. They don't represent just one voice. They represent dozens. So when agents push for urgency and clarity, they're not undermining growth. They're trying to protect it. Because from a purely economic standpoint, this is the strongest bargaining position the league has ever had, but also the most delicate. Explosive growth creates leverage, but it also creates vulnerability. Because expectations inflate quickly, and inflated expectations can create internal friction. Here's another layer most people overlook. Caitlin Clark's arrival didn't just raise revenue projections. It shifted fan alignment. New fans often attach to new stars. That means public narrative focus shifts too. Veteran leaders who once controlled the league's spotlight now share it. That's not inherently negative, but it changes perception. And perception influences negotiation optics. If a strike were to occur during the most hyped period of the league's history, casual fans might not dissect labor dynamics. They might simply see instability. And instability can chill excitement. This isn't about blame. It's about timing. And timing is everything in labor negotiations. There's a difference between striking during stagnation and striking during acceleration. One feels like a necessary stand. The other feels like an interruption. And whether that perception is fair or not doesn't matter. Perception drives public sentiment. Now here's the most delicate part. No one inside leadership is openly positioning this as old guard versus new era. But when generational financial shifts happen rapidly, tension is almost inevitable. Veterans want recognition and compensation aligned with new revenue. Younger players want opportunity without disruption. Agents want contracts signed during peak leverage. Owners want predictability while maintaining control. And at the center of it all is a rookie-scale contract system that doesn't yet reflect the full commercial gravity certain players bring. That reality alone complicates negotiation optics. Because when a player generates revenue impact that outpaces her salary scale, it reshapes discussions about cap structure. And cap structure debates can ripple across every tier of salary. Which brings us back to the internal tension. Some players may view this moment as the perfect time to push aggressively. Others may view it as the worst time to risk instability. Neither side is irrational. But divergence in risk assessment weakens collective clarity. And that's what makes the agent's involvement so significant. They're not emotional stakeholders. They're market analysts. They study timing. They study growth patterns. They understand when leverage is strongest. And many of them appear to believe the optimal play is to secure a deal during momentum, not test how durable that momentum is. Because here's the quiet truth. Momentum fueled by a single breakout star can amplify an entire league. But it also concentrates attention. And concentrated attention magnifies instability. If something fractures publicly now, it won't be ignored. It will be amplified. That's why this moment feels heavier than previous negotiations. Because it's not happening in the shadows. It's happening under brighter lights than ever before. And once brighter lights hit internal fractures, they're harder to conceal. So now the real question becomes, is this negotiation about maximizing growth or protecting control? Because when agents begin coordinating together, when players express hesitation, when deadlines approach during peak visibility, it signals something deeper than routine bargaining. It signals a power recalibration. And when power recalibrates in real time, someone inevitably feels threatened. The next move will reveal everything. Because if agents continue pressing for direct involvement, if internal divisions persist, if leadership doubles down, then this isn't just a negotiation. It's a silent struggle over who defines the next era of the WNBA. And once that line is crossed, there's no going back to business as usual. But here's where it becomes even more intense. Because when agents bypass traditional union communication structures, that's not just concern, that's strategic positioning. And that shift could redefine how future negotiations are handled altogether. Which brings us to the next escalation. Because this isn't just tension anymore. It might be a quiet power move. When agents start bypassing the union structure, that's not routine. That's not casual frustration. That's leverage. And leverage inside a labor negotiation is never accidental. Let's be clear about something. Agents are not union members. They don't vote in collective bargaining decisions. They don't sit at the official negotiation table. Their role is advisory, behind the scenes. So when nearly a dozen prominent agents align and formally request coordinated communication, access to proposals, and transparency in survey wording, they are stepping closer to the center of power. Not officially, but functionally. Because influence doesn't require a title. It requires access. And agents are now asking for access. Direct access. Not filtered summaries. Not leadership interpretations. Not secondhand bullet points. They want to see the league's proposal themselves. They want to examine the fine print. They want to understand the framing. That changes the dynamic. Because if agents are reviewing the same documents leadership is reviewing, they become parallel interpreters. And if their interpretation differs, players will hear both sides. Now imagine being a mid-tier player in this situation. You're hearing union leadership explain why strike leverage is necessary. Then you're hearing your agent explain why timing may be risky. Two trusted voices. Two different strategic outlooks. That creates cognitive tension, and cognitive tension inside a union weakens unity. This is why leadership typically controls information flow during negotiations. Not to hide things, but to preserve message clarity. Because once multiple interpretations circulate, alignment becomes harder to maintain. And here's where this situation becomes especially unusual. Agents rarely align publicly. They compete. They fight for clients. They undercut each other during free agency. But right now they're unified. That tells you the concern is structural, not personal. They're not attacking individuals. They're challenging process. They're signaling that the negotiation strategy may not reflect market timing. And here's the part that makes this feel like a quiet power recalibration. If agents gain consistent access to proposals and influence survey wording, they effectively gain soft influence over collective decision-making. Not through votes, but through advisory pressure. And advisory pressure matters because players rely heavily on their agents for financial guidance, especially during high-stakes transitions. So while the union technically holds negotiation authority, agents are positioning themselves as financial reality anchors. That doesn't mean leadership is wrong. It means leadership's authority is no longer unquestioned. And once authority becomes questioned during negotiations, power shifts subtly. Now add another layer. The league office is watching all of this carefully. Ownership groups understand internal division better than anyone. They've seen it across other leagues. When agents start pushing for direct communication with ownership representatives, it creates optionality. Even if owners don't formally negotiate with agents, the mere existence of that channel increases informational pressure. It sends a signal. If leadership doesn't secure a deal, alternative influence pathways exist. That's leverage. And leverage inside a union environment is volatile. Because unions function best when internal debate stays internal. Once outside entities sense fracture, strategy changes. Owners may slow down. They may tighten offers. They may let internal pressure build. Because divided opposition negotiates from a weaker position. Now here's the deeper tension. Leadership likely views this agent coordination as destabilizing. From their perspective, unity is critical to maximize gains. Strike threats only work if they're credible. If agents are signaling hesitation, strike credibility softens. And once credibility softens, bargaining power declines. So what we're seeing may not just be frustration. It may be a strategic clash over leverage timing. Leadership may believe this is the strongest moment ever to push hard. Agents may believe this is the strongest moment ever to close quickly. Push versus secure. Maximize versus stabilize. Both strategies can be valid, but they can't operate simultaneously. That's the friction. And the friction is no longer subtle. Because once letters are leaked to media, once ESPN reports surface, once public narrative shifts toward agents at war with the union, the story is no longer contained. Now it becomes perception. And perception influences negotiation tone. Players read headlines. Fans read headlines. Sponsors read headlines. Perception of instability grows. And instability during explosive growth feels heavier than instability during quiet seasons. Here's the most fascinating part. This isn't loud hostility. No one is publicly attacking leadership by name. No one is accusing wrongdoing directly. But coordinated pressure doesn't require insults. It requires alignment. And alignment among agents signals seriousness. Because agents don't risk relationships lightly. If they're pushing this hard, it's because multiple clients are uneasy. And if multiple clients are uneasy, leadership has a trust management problem. Not necessarily a negotiation problem. A trust problem. And trust problems are harder to solve than salary disputes. You can renegotiate numbers. Rebuilding confidence takes longer. Now think about what happens next. If leadership resists agent involvement, tension escalates. If leadership allows deeper agent participation, authority diffuses. Either path changes the structure of influence moving forward. This could redefine how future CBA negotiations are handled. Because once agents gain precedent for deeper involvement, that door doesn't close easily. And that's why this moment feels bigger than one negotiation cycle. It feels like an institutional pivot. Who drives strategy in the modern WNBA? Union leadership? Player superstars? Agents representing market leverage? Or some hybrid of all three? The answer to that question may shape the next decade. And that's what makes this feel less like temporary conflict and more like a foundational shift. But here's the pressure point looming over everything. There's a deadline, a real one, and deadlines reveal who blinks first. Because once scheduling risk becomes real, once media partners start asking questions, once owners feel public heat, someone has to make the next move. And that move will reveal whether this was just turbulence or the beginning of a permanent power shift. And if you think this story is already intense, the final layer makes it even more critical. Because the league isn't just negotiating a contract. It's negotiating its identity during the most important growth window in its history. And if they miscalculate now, the consequences won't just be financial. They'll be historical. Which brings us to the edge of this entire situation. Because what happens next doesn't just affect one season. It affects the future of the league itself. There's a date circled quietly behind the scenes. A target window. A pressure point. Because negotiations don't stretch forever without consequences. At some point, scheduling decisions have to be made. Arena bookings get finalized. Broadcast grids get locked. Marketing campaigns get approved. And once those wheels start turning, flexibility shrinks. That's what makes this moment so tense. This isn't abstract debate anymore. There's real timing pressure. If an agreement isn't reached in time, the ripple effects won't just stay in boardrooms. They'll spill into public view. Games get delayed. Training camps shift. Media narratives change. Sponsors pause. And momentum cools. Right now, the WNBA is riding something rare. A wave of visibility it has worked decades to achieve. New viewers. New sponsors. New energy. The kind of growth leagues pray for. And growth windows like this don't last forever. They require stability to mature. But stability requires trust. And trust is the one thing currently under strain. Agents are pushing for clarity. Leadership is pushing for leverage. Players are navigating conflicting advice. Owners are watching for cracks. And fans are mostly unaware of how delicate the moment truly is. Because from the outside, it still looks like normal sports business. But from the inside, it feels like a crossroads. If leadership holds firm and secures a deal that meaningfully shifts revenue structure, this could become the defining negotiation that permanently elevates player compensation. If agents succeed in accelerating compromise, the league could lock in growth and preserve its current surge. But if division deepens, if deadlines slip, if strike threats escalate publicly, the narrative shifts. And narrative matters. In professional sports, public momentum drives valuation. Valuation drives revenue. Revenue drives salary caps. Salary caps drive contracts. Contracts drive careers. Everything is connected. That's why this situation is bigger than personalities, bigger than headlines, bigger than one rookie or one leadership committee. It's about direction, because the WNBA is transitioning from survival era to expansion era. And transitions are messy. They expose fault lines that were invisible during quieter times. They amplify differences in strategy. They test unity. And right now, unity is being tested. The most delicate question hanging over everything is this. Can leadership maintain collective alignment while agents gain influence? Because once parallel influence systems form, tension doesn't disappear overnight. It evolves. And if players feel caught between two strategic voices, confidence wavers. Confidence wavering during negotiation weakens leverage. Weak leverage invites pressure. Pressure invites compromise. But compromise under pressure doesn't always feel satisfying. That's the tightrope. Now imagine this scenario 6 months from now. If a deal is reached smoothly, this moment becomes a footnote. A tense chapter that ultimately strengthened the league. But if cracks widen? If distrust lingers? If players begin relying more heavily on agent interpretation than union messaging long-term, the power structure inside the league permanently changes. And once that shift happens, there's no resetting to the old model. Because this isn't just about numbers on paper. It's about who the players trust most during critical decisions. Trust defines influence. Influence defines direction. And direction defines the future. There's also a generational undercurrent here that cannot be ignored. Veterans who built this league want rightful compensation during its breakout phase. New era players want to grow inside stability. Agents want market efficiency. Owners want cost control with public growth. Every side believes they're protecting the future. But protection strategies differ. And when protection strategies collide during momentum, history is written. This could become the negotiation remembered as the moment the WNBA unified around growth, or the moment internal division slowed its acceleration. That's how pivotal this feels, because for the first time in decades, the league isn't fighting for relevance. It has relevance. The challenge now isn't survival. It's management of growth. And managing growth is harder than surviving obscurity. Survival unites. Growth complicates. More money means more debate about distribution. More visibility means more scrutiny. More leverage means more risk. And right now, every stakeholder is calculating risk differently. Which brings us back to the central question that started this entire story. What happens when the people negotiating your future stop trusting each other? We're about to find out. Because deadlines don't wait. Momentum doesn't pause politely. And power doesn't stay static. The next few weeks could define the next decade. Will leadership tighten ranks and secure a transformational deal? Will agents reshape how influence works behind the scenes? Will players unify under one strategic vision? Or will this moment expose fractures that permanently alter negotiation dynamics? The answers aren't public yet, but the pressure is real. And one thing is certain. The WNBA is no longer negotiating from the shadows. It's negotiating under brighter lights than ever before. And brighter lights magnify everything. The growth, the tension, the ambition, the doubt. This isn't just a contract battle. It's a battle over the identity of the league during its breakout era. And whatever happens next, there's no going back to how things were. This moment will either be remembered as the negotiation that cemented the WNBA's rise, or the moment internal power struggles complicated its biggest opportunity. Agents stepping forward, leadership holding firm, players navigating uncertainty, owners waiting strategically, all while the league rides unprecedented visibility. That's not normal turbulence. That's transformation pressure. And transformation pressure reveals everything. The only question left is, who controls the direction of that transformation? Because the future of the league isn't just being negotiated on paper. It's being negotiated through trust. And trust, once shaken, is the hardest currency to rebuild. If you've made it this far, you already know this story is bigger than headlines. And we're going to keep breaking it down as it unfolds. So if you want real insight, not surface-level takes, if you want the truth behind the power moves, if you want updates the moment this situation shifts, make sure you hit subscribe right now. Because the next development in this story could change everything. And when it does, you'll hear it here first. Welcome to the new era. Let's watch history unfold.